Let's found.
Hey, hi, hello. Welcome to Diana Emerson today. We're listening to True Disturbing Reddit Posts.
I worked at a local government agency for a long time. Each summer, we would get a new crop of interns. Most were fine. Some caused issues, like when we caught two of them making out in the file room, but overall, they were just normal kids from high school or college trying to get some work experience. In 2016, my department received an intern later than usual, right in the middle of summer. Warner was a bit older than the usual crowd, around my age, maybe late 20s. We initially hit it off pretty well, and although I found him sort of strange, I didn't mind since he was friendly and we had some common interests. He was the only person in my department who was even close to my age. The interns were all teenagers, and the regular staff averaged around 60 years old, which is older than my mom. I was psyched to have a peer to chat with, so occasionally I would eat lunch with Warner, or stop by his cubicle and have a chat. His strangeness was mostly an outsized personality, a mix of over the top enthusiasm with a bit of social awkwardness. But I got zero bad vibes from the guy. It wasn't long before Warner started having major performance problems at work. He would produce little to no work on most days, no show or arrive late without informing anyone, and generally acted unprofessionally. One day, he showed up for work at 3:15 p.m. when our workday ended at 4:30. The office manager was livid and told him to go home. His behavior bothered nearly everyone in my office, but I didn't supervise him, and we had plenty of slacker interns in the past. While his antics were a bit of a spectacle, it wasn't a big deal to me. If you're wondering why he wasn't let go, two words: political favor. I found out from Warner himself that he was hired because his uncle had donated to the campaign of our big boss, so he wasn't going anywhere. Near the end of that summer, I put in my notice that I was leaving my job and relocating to a new state. Once Warner caught wind of this, he would constantly complain that it sucked I was leaving, because we barely had time to become friends. I would always laugh lightly in response and give a sympathetic, yeah. He would start to monopolize my time at work more and more, and it became disruptive to the people who sat near me. I found it slightly annoying, but I also was extremely happy to be leaving that job for reasons unrelated to Warner, and I spent my last month there not caring much about what my coworkers thought. I tolerated Warner lingering by my desk. One day, he caught me leaving work and offered me a ride home. I usually took the bus, and occasionally other coworkers would offer me rides home if they were going my way, so this didn't seem odd to me. I accepted and walked to his car with him. It smelled awful and was full of garbage. He hastily cleared off the passenger seat and apologized for the mess. We got on our way, but once we were on the main road, he started begging me to stop and get dinner with him. I laughed and said he didn't need to ask me that intensely, and said we could stop at a diner on the way. We had a nice meal, with pleasant conversation even. He was intelligent and had a variety of interests. Our political positions aligned, and we shared disdain for our cranky old coworkers. I had a good time. I expressed that he didn't need to drive me all the way home now that it was late, but he kept insisting. So I relented. As I directed him towards my house, he started in again with the whining about how our developing friendship was cut short because I was moving. At this point, I was tired of hearing this. The decision to leave my job and move away from home was extremely difficult to make, and I was proud of how bold I was being. I stopped responding and laughing, and his whining began to fade out. We came up to the turn to get onto my street, and as I pointed it out, he accelerated and drove right past it, laughing. I chuckled, almost in a oh my god, what the kind of way, thinking that he was just joking around. When I began giving instructions about how to turn around and get back, he started begging me to keep the hangout session going because he was lonely. This immediately set me on high alert. It suddenly hit me that I'm in a man's car, someone I don't know that well, who doesn't exercise proper behavior at work, which is the only context that I know him from. And now, he's displaying weird behavior outside of work as well. My instinct was to not insist I be let out of his car. I felt as if this would escalate the situation into something bad, and in hindsight, it may have been the right thing to do when I think about the type of person that he turned out to be. I told him we could hang out at the park near my house if he wanted to talk. He seemed to like that idea, and we parked and walked over. The pleasant conversations resumed. Besides the weird clinginess, he was perfectly fine to talk to, until he dumped his entire life story on me, including his prior arrests for theft, his heroin addiction, and related struggles with depression. I tried to be sympathetic, but I was very put off by this. It was a lot of highly personal information all at once, and I was still on alert because of his prior behavior. I tried changing the subject by showing him pics of my dog. I scrolled one pic too far on the roll, and the next photo was of me wearing makeup and posing cutely, way different than the slob that I was at work. He grabbed the phone and went, "Wow, you are very photogenic." I felt awkward and didn't say anything in response. There was a long silence. Then he launched into a weird tangent about how compatible we were, and that we have similar interests, etc., etc. Ultimately, it got to the point where he said that he wished that I wasn't moving, so we could try hanging out again, but this time on a date. I didn't say anything, and he broke the silence with, "Sorry I'm saying all this stuff. I'm actually high right now. That's why I know where Riverside, the bad neighborhood that had previously come up in conversation, is. I went there yesterday to score. Otherwise, I wouldn't have said it, so I'm really sorry." Internally, I freaked out. He had definitely put his drug addiction in the past tense, and I assumed it was something he was recovering from, not currently in the midst of. I also realized I'd been in a car that he was operating while he was under the influence. I don't know anything about heroin, so I was clueless, and overall, I just felt very stupid. He immediately started whining and begging me not to judge him or hate him, and kept saying over and over again how nice I am and how understanding I am, that I'm pretty and smart, all of these weird compliments interspersed with talking down about himself. I didn't know what to do, so I smiled reassuringly and told him not to worry, but that I was tired and wanted to go home. That's when he started crying. He had this weird, wheezy sob, but no tears were coming out. I sat there silently while he did this, trying to come up with some sort of graceful escape plan. My patience was wearing thin, and my anxiety was now through the roof. It's a weird feeling to be both annoyed and panicky at the same time. I stood up and apologized, said the park was close to my house, so I'll just hoof it home, and started to leave when I remembered I left my stuff in his car. Trying a new approach, I casually mentioned that I forgot my stuff in his car, and joked that if he wanted my dirty lunch containers, he could keep them. He ceased his bizarre crying, stood up and ran over to his car to unlock it, and I grabbed my stuff out of his back seat. His demeanor changed drastically as he calmly apologized for making things weird, and asked if he could drop me off at home so I didn't have to walk alone at night. I said yes, but made him drop me off a block over from my little side street so he wouldn't see which house was mine. I could end it there, but what bothered me the most about this guy happened after this encounter. I'll try to make this part short. A week or two after that weird evening, end of August by this point, I had my last day at the job and moved 1,000 miles across the country. Warner would sometimes text me long ramblings, detailing his feelings about himself and about our missed opportunity. I didn't respond to these messages. Now that I wasn't near him, I didn't feel the need to placate. The text stopped after a few weeks, and I all but forgot about it. Fast forward to February, and I get a text from a former coworker. Her message said, "Sorry you had to hear about it like this." And her next message was a link to a local news article titled, "Man Dies from Wounds in Riverside Stabbing on Wednesday." Because of the way she worded it, I thought Warner was the victim. But when I read the article, it included his mugshot and the charges against him. He was the attacker. He had murdered someone. I felt so shocked and disgusted. I couldn't believe that I knew someone who took another human's life. Later on, I called an old work friend for some of the details. Apparently, shortly after I left the job, Warner was fired for trashing the men's bathroom. Like, he just threw around anything he could lift, pouring out all the soap from the dispensers, turning over trash cans, and scattering debris all over the place. He then lost his apartment. Presumably, some of the articles about the stabbing describe Warner as homeless. I have to assume that that's how he ended up in the aforementioned Riverside. There are a lot of homeless drug addicts who squat in abandoned houses there. I wondered if the man that he stabbed had refused to give him something that he wanted, and that is how he reacted to a hard no. I don't think I made all of the wisest decisions during my interactions with Warner, but I'm glad I was able to avoid setting him off, since he was clearly not stable. Hands down, Warner had to be the worst intern that I'd ever encountered. I live in a small, small town. Like, you blink and you miss it. The best we can boast is that we have a single stop sign and a gas station, which we only have because of the nearby highway. Any actual semblance of a town is almost half an hour away. So when things get scary out here, it's amplified. The occasional homeless person is no big deal. They're often drifting through. Drug addicts run rampant and will steal everything they can from your house. But it's the normal out here. However, what happened a few years back certainly wasn't normal. Originally, I was dead asleep in my bed. I only woke up because it was burning hot in my room. It was summertime, and there wasn't much I could do about that. I just remember tossing and turning until I got a creepy feeling that fell into the pit of my stomach. I glanced over to the bathroom door that was open with the light on. Everything was normal. I left the light on so I wouldn't trip and die if I had to pee in the middle of the night. But next, I glanced at the window directly across from my bed. I had no curtains, but I did have a set of blinds. Part of the blinds had been broken from wear and tear, and the crappy AC output beneath it would make them move back and forth, so you'd get a glimpse outside every so often. The yard light was still going, but what made me stop was the outline outside of my window. The figure of someone directly beyond my window pane, almost like it was waiting for the blinds to move to watch me. I didn't have an imagination as a child. That had been trained out of me. But the sight was enough to pour every horror film into my head at that very moment. I squeezed my eyes shut and pulled my blankets over my head and slept in a cloth oven that night. By morning time, the figure was gone. I remember running to my mom's room on the verge of tears in the morning, telling her what had happened. She laughed at me like I was an idiot, told me that it was probably just a stray cat that had climbed up there for one odd reason or another. I almost believed her, since my window was pretty high off the ground, but something just didn't sit right with me. Later that day, when we were doing yard work, I glanced over at my window and saw one of our metal patio chairs had been pushed up to it. I pointed out to my mom, who proceeded to chew me out. That's how the cat probably got up there, moron. Stop leaving furniture everywhere. But I hadn't moved it. It was heavy enough that I struggled with it. So we moved it back, and so began a pattern. At night, I'd see the figure, complain to my mom, and we'd find a chair moved back every single morning. And this went on for a few weeks. My mother stopped caring about my concerns until one morning we saw where the outside screen of my window had been sliced open. I still remember her shaking her head and complaining about those damn stray cats, the ones that we had still yet to see. I could tell she was unnerved by the development. I couldn't handle it anymore, and I opted to sleep in our living room that night. The only problem was, our kitchen and living room connected, which meant there were always several windows. The first night of my move went well, despite my back hurting from the couch. I avoided my room like the plague. It wasn't until about 4 days later that we ran into an issue. I woke up and glanced at the clock above the fireplace. It read a little past 3 a.m. I couldn't realize why I'd woken up until it happened again. There was a beam of light shining in from the kitchen window, almost as if someone was shining a flashlight through. I saw it trace along the walls and land on the left seat across from the couch that I was on. I was absolutely mortified. When I told my mom, she continued to laugh at me. I gave in and decided that I would sleep in my dad's room, even though it had a gigantic window in it. He slept in the recliner with a huge TV, so I felt more safe having someone around. The yard light was directly outside the window anyway, so it seemed foolproof. That was until I woke up out of habitual fear and watched through the window across from the bed. Everything seemed normal as time drug on, and I felt like a moron. Maybe my mom was right. That was until I saw a lone figure come out of the woods by the backyard shed, walk directly under the light, and head to the patio furniture like he'd been here plenty of times before. I still remember the large build the man had, and the confidence like he was the one who lived here and wasn't creeping around my yard in the dead of night. I just remember listening to the TV until I fell asleep again, hoping to get another glimpse. My dad would have been pissed if I had woken him up. He was grumpy on a good day, terrifying on a bad. I didn't feel like risking it unless I had solid proof because of just how scared I was. The next morning, my mom chewed me out again for the patio furniture, which was pretty much routine by this point. Although this time, something new happened. She demanded I stop playing in the toolboxes of the garage. A bunch of tools had been taken out and left on our doorstep. Screwdrivers, a large hammer, flashlight. But it wasn't me. I begged with my mom, pleaded with her, just stay up with me one night. We couldn't close our garage because it was an open carport, and I wasn't going to get my ass beaten for touching tools because of someone else. It was driving me mad. Finally, she agreed. That night, we would stay awake in the living room. I finally fell asleep before my mom, but I remember her waking me up in a panic. She pointed to the window that overlooked into our garage. We could see the top of someone's head as they walked back and forth. There was the sound of someone placing metal tools down on brick steps, as if they were trying to be quiet, but couldn't fully muffle it. She whispered for me to go wake my dad. My dad was angry, having been woken up in the middle of the night by his frantic daughter. He grabbed his pistol and headed out the back door, towards the front of the house where the garage was located. We heard my dad screaming and someone dropping tools. Then, the sound of a gunshot, twice. Crazed footsteps pounding around the garage, and they felt as if they were coming directly from my chest. My mom peeked out the window and then opened the door, just as my dad stumbled in. He had missed both shots because of his unstable aim, but told us that there was a man crouching at our front door, looking at our door handle. None of us slept that night, and in the morning, we phoned the police from the nearest town. They didn't do much besides ask if anything had been stolen, asked for a description of the man, and then told us to install cameras. But that was it. They said that whoever the guy was probably was just looking for something easy to steal for quick money. If that had been the case, why hadn't he stolen the tools, the generator, the welder, or broken into any of the vehicles just sitting in our garage? We finally set up hunting trail cameras around the house, but nothing has happened since. Coming home from college for holidays, I still have nightmares about this, even years later, when I sleep in my own bed. I don't know what he was looking for, or why he did the things that he was doing. But whatever the case may be, man at the window, let's not meet. This story dates back to my childhood. I was 12 and my older sister and I were home alone for the weekend. I was waiting for a friend to pick me up and getting restless. There was a knock at the door, and thinking it was her, I ran to answer it without checking through the peephole. There was a man standing there with a clipboard, and he said that he needed to check our gas meter. I was entrenched in the disappointment of my friend still not having arrived, so I just told him, yeah, sure, whatever you need to do. I didn't notice at the time, but he wasn't dressed as a city official. He had on a green and purple t-shirt with bold stripes, like the host of Blue's Clues. He took a step inside the door, and immediately went up the stairs to where our bedrooms were and walked into the open door of my room, the typical girly room with pink and glitter. Thank God my sister came down the stairs at almost that exact same moment. She said, "Oh, is that Daphne's dad? Why is he going upstairs?" That's when I took the moment to complain about how Daphne wasn't here yet, and was going on about how unreliable she was when my sister cut me off. Wait. If Daphne isn't here, then who is that? I said, "He's here to read the gas meters." Her face turned white. She flung open the front door and dragged me out, hand clamped over my protesting mouth. She said, "Our gas meters are outside." Neither of us had a cell phone. Nobody did. It was the 60s. And obviously, we weren't going back in the house to call the authorities on the landline. Then, my ever resourceful sister had a stroke of genius. At that very moment, there was a man walking right by our house, and she motioned him over. She spoke to the man clearly and loudly enough that her voice carried directly into our house. "Oh, Dad, it's good you're home. There's a man from the city here to read the gas meters upstairs." And just like she had hoped, the man on the street said, "What are you talking about?" The man that had entered our house, the one in the striped shirt, bolted from within, running down the block before hitting a corner and vanishing from view. The man we were speaking to asked us repeatedly if we were okay, if we needed him to stay and wait in the yard with us until our parents came home. He was a very kind man. We were so startled that we barely thanked him before we ran back in the house, slamming and locking the doors and windows shut. As irate as my sister was that I let someone in the house, she begged me to not call the police because my parents left her in charge, and she worried that she'd be in trouble. I didn't want to catch any heat from carelessly allowing some guy in, so I was on the same page with her. But 3 weeks later, a girl in our community went missing. Same MO. She was home alone, and authorities found the door open with no signs of forced entry. My sister and I discussed our options, but deep down, we knew we had no choice but to come clean. We told the police everything. I don't know if it ever helped, but they did tell us that they had reason to believe that it was likely the same man. They also tracked down the man who had helped us on the street. Turns out, we already knew him. He worked in the butcher shop, but in our panic, we didn't recognize him. He was lifelong friends with our family after that. Our parents were mortified. They weren't angry with us, just glad we were okay, though they did have to review all the rules of caution and didn't leave us home alone for quite a while. They ultimately found the missing neighborhood girl, unfortunately, not alive. According to the police, it was likely that she had been held for a few days before being burned alive. They never did catch the guy in the striped shirt. From what I remember, he was probably in his 30s back in the early 1960s. So my guess is that he's long gone by now, whether from natural causes or karma for the life that he was living. Both my sister and I felt a tremendous amount of guilt for being so focused on not getting in trouble that we kept our mouths shut when it potentially would have helped that girl if we were more forthcoming in the moment. That is something that I still deal with to this day. I thank the Lord for my sister's resourcefulness and quick action that day, though. I do not doubt that it made all the difference in the world between us surviving and facing the same fate as that other neighborhood girl. This story happened back in the summer of 2021. I lived by myself in a nice house inside a small town. Low crime, but still the occasional shady figure comes around. Anyway, I was at work that day on a smoke break. I happened to watch a dog get thrown from a moving vehicle. 4-lane city traffic during the start of rush hour. I ran right out there, scooped his little ass up, and booked it back to my workplace. He wasn't injured, amazingly, and as a bleeding heart animal lover, I decided to take him home with me until I could figure out what exactly to do with them. I have a large amount of cats, and always have, but this was my first experience with a dog that I was solely responsible for. This guy was very shy, head hung, tail tucked, jumpy, just looking at me with these big sad eyes, like I was about to beat him. I was clueless on the subject of dog personalities and tendencies. I just knew they needed to be taken out frequently. His first night with me, we'd been out maybe 15 times, as I didn't want him jumping in my house. I was having my final cigarette of the night on my porch at around 11 p.m. The dog was on a lead, chilling under my chair as I smoked and poked about on Reddit. I see a man walking on the sidewalk that runs right by my house. The man kept glancing up at me before he passed. Shortly after he passed my house, he stopped, turned on a heel, and approached. Hey, can you tell me where 302 Church Street is? He asked. I told him that I would search the address on my phone, which, of course, was taking a minute to load. He explained that he didn't have a phone of his own and was attempting to get to a friend's house, taking small steps towards me the whole time. Finally, the address that I summoned came up. It's exactly 2 blocks north of here, right on the southwest corner of the cross street, I told him, pointing in the direction. He kept his eyes locked on me, continuing to slowly move closer. Doggo starts growling very softly at this point. I'd forgotten he was even there up until now. Mind if I take a look at the map? He grinned sheepishly. I'm bad with directions. I rose from my seat, pointing once more. It's just 2 blocks up this road. Just follow it. 2 blocks. The house will be on your left, making it very clear that I wasn't just going to give him my phone. Well, can I call them? I need to let them know that I'm coming, he said, still creeping closer, extending his hand this time. No, I curtly replied. How about text them? Pushing forward still. Dude, no. I started towards my door. Just, just let me see your phone. He was visibly becoming pissed off, clearly trying to contain it and getting way too close to my porch. As a last-ditch effort of getting this dude to f off, I say, dude, you need to get the f out of my yard. My dog is protective and he will f you up. Hell, I didn't know the first thing about this dog, let alone whether he had the capacity to f someone up. I just hoped that saying so would intimidate pushy phone guy. Like I had said the magic words, Pupper springs into action, a la the wolf creature from the never-ending story. He emerges like a bullet from under the chair, growling, snarling, barking his little tail off. He jerks me damn near off the porch trying to get at this guy. He sounded and acted like a 100-pound attack dog, not a 35-pound timid beagle mix. I was afraid. I didn't know if the pup would turn on me. As stated previously, at the time I knew absolutely jack shit about dogs. He backed his hindquarters into my legs, almost nudging me to the door, still carrying on. Eyes locked on the phone dude and baring his teeth every step of the way. Phone dude holds up his hands and backs off, stammers something like, 2 blocks north. Yeah, got it, and begins walking that way. I head inside, cut off my lights, and peek out the window at him. The guy glances back at my house, assured that I'm inside. He turns and begins walking the completely opposite direction of which I had originally pointed him in. The icing on the cake? He pulls out a phone from his pocket and raises it to his ear as if to make a call. Doggo secured his place as a member of my family that night. He is incredibly protective of me and has frightened away more than one other creep since this incident. He's attached to my hip and has made it known that he is grateful to be in a safe and loving home, wherein he will never again become a projectile from a moving vehicle. His name is Hank, and I truly believe that that night would have ended very poorly for me had he not been there. To preface this story, I have to say that I truly enjoy driving, like hours-long drives to nowhere with no destination in mind, just me, my music, and the road ahead of me. Living in Nebraska, I'd often take back roads or lonely highways cutting through the countryside to small towns, and eventually cities. and I'd usually take these drives at night since there was way less traffic to worry about. This is something that I've done ever since I got my license 4, maybe 5 years ago, and I've never once had any sort of issue, nor have I ever run into any trouble. That was until a few nights ago. For reference, I'm a relatively small 22-year-old female, and as I've stated before, I often take these drives completely and utterly alone. They're a good way to clear my head when I'm stressed, upset, or overwhelmed, or for me to get a plan together to sort personal issues out. I've also done these long and lonely drives to get away from the toxicity of my household when I used to live with my parents as a means of coping with their alcoholism. Though, now that I've moved out and am in a much better place mentally, I don't really have the urge to get in my car and just drive anymore. Not much, at least. However, on the night that this event took place, I was feeling pretty overwhelmed, stressed, and anxious with a cluster of personal issues that I'd rather not get into. I felt restless and irritable around my boyfriend, couldn't focus on anything else, and decided I would take a drive to clear my head. My boyfriend was understanding and told me to be careful and not to be gone for too terribly long, since it was already getting pretty late. I agreed, gave him a kiss goodbye, and left. I drove around our city for about 30 minutes, but I was still feeling on edge about everything transpiring in my personal life, so I decided to drive further north down those familiar, dark, winding one-lane highways. I kept the car at a steady 65 miles per hour, taking the turns at a slower pace in case a deer jumped out around the bend, and was admiring the vast empty darkness of the snow-capped fields and barren trees. It was honestly a bit creepy being all alone with no cars in sight, in seemingly the middle of nowhere, the few houses miles back from the road lightless, and the dead cornfields withered away and covered in snow. It was like something out of a horror movie, and I half expected to see a ghost pop up in my rearview mirror, or to see someone clamber out from the patches of trees dotting the horizon. The only light came from my headlights, and even then, I still strained to see through the inky darkness of the night. By now, it was just after midnight, and I told myself that once I had made the familiar roundabout that would either take you to a small town or back up towards the city, I would head back home. The roundabout was still maybe 15 to 20 minutes away, but other than my imagination picturing the worst, I wasn't really all that concerned. I mean, I was by myself. I didn't have any other motorists to worry about, right? Wrong. As I'm rounding another bend, I notice a vehicle with its hazard lights flashing, maybe a quarter of a mile in front of me. It was some sort of sedan, dark colored, and was angled to where only part of it was on the shoulder, while the rest jutted out onto the road. Like they had tried to pull over in a hurry, but didn't quite manage to do that. The driver's side door was flung wide open, and as I slowed my vehicle down and angled it towards the opposite side of the road to pass, I could make out what looked like maybe blood on the inside of the open door. I didn't see anyone on the road or in the car, and I was the only motorist in sight. Cell phone reception is pretty spotty at best in this part of the country, but more often than not, you couldn't get reception no matter how hard you prayed, which was definitely the case when I took a glance at my phone to see if I had any bars. So, a lone female on the road, at night, pulling up nearby to a vacant vehicle that looks like someone had been attacked on the inside, with no cell service. Just great. Now, I'm no dummy. I've watched countless episodes of Investigation Discovery and Criminal Minds, and read far too many true crime books to know that this had bad and danger written all over it. But there was still a small part of me that worried something terrible had happened to whoever was in that vehicle, and I thought I needed to help. These roads don't get a lot of traffic late at night, and the temperatures were well below freezing by now. If someone were hurt or in trouble, there was no one and nothing else to help them but me. Still, I erred on the side of caution. I was still driving my car, though a bit more slowly, and as I approached the vehicle, I rolled down my passenger side window a bit, shut off the music, and called out, "Hey, anyone there? Are you okay?" I didn't hear a response. I worried they were passed out somewhere, but I wasn't about to get out and go look for them. I told myself that I'd call out one more time, and if I didn't hear anything, I would leave, and the moment that there was reception, I'd call it in. And if I did hear someone, well, I'd figure out my next course of action then. So again, I shout, "Hey, what happened? Are you okay?" There was silence for a beat, and then I heard rustling in the shadows of the trees, followed by a gruff voice saying, "Yeah." I was relieved at first, and was about to say something in response, or possibly even stop my car and get out, when I noticed three things nearly simultaneously. As I inched my way past the front of the sedan, I noticed that there was no damage to the hood or anywhere else on the vehicle, which I found to be strange considering the blood on the inside of the door. In my rearview mirror, I caught a glance of someone creeping out from behind the sedan, and they were making their way towards my car, fast. The person didn't have any blood on them, nor did they appear to be injured in any way. They were wearing a mask, but not like a face mask for COVID or a ski mask or anything normal like that, but one of those masks you would see in the Purge movies, and they were holding something in their hand. I don't know for sure what it was, I couldn't get a good look, but from its length and shape, my guess was maybe a tire iron or a crowbar. I don't need to tell you that I slammed on the gas the moment I noticed those things and drove like a bat straight out of hell, my heart thundering in my chest, my entire body shaking. My window was still rolled down in my haste, and the music was still shut off, so I could very clearly hear someone, definitely a man, shouting at me, though I had no clue what they were saying. I just knew that I had to get out of there, immediately. I stole one last look in my rearview mirror as I drove off, mostly to see if they were getting in their sedan to chase, or if they had stopped. The man with the weapon was still standing in the middle of the road watching me, and right before I looked away from the mirror, I saw a second man emerge from the trees that had been rustling earlier, also wearing one of those creepy masks, with no trace of blood on it. I probably broke every law for speeding that night, but I wanted to get as far away from those men as possible. As soon as I made it to the roundabout, I turned towards the small town, parked in the Walmart parking lot that thankfully still had cars from who I assumed were workers closing up shop, and proceeded to have a full-on meltdown. When I could pull myself together, I called one of my friends, T, who was a police officer, to tell him what had happened and ask what I should do. He was concerned for me, and after asking if I was okay, where I was, did they follow me, he told me that since this was out of the city limits, he couldn't do much on his end, but he could get in contact with the local police or sheriff in that jurisdiction to take my statement and to check it out. I agreed, thanked him, and while I waited for the police to show up, I called my boyfriend. Through my hysterical sobs and panic, I managed to tell him what happened not even 10 or so minutes ago. He was, as you could imagine, super freaked for my safety and wanted me to either come home immediately or drive down himself to take me home. I told him the police were on their way to take my statement, so I couldn't leave, but that I was okay, and I stayed on the phone with him until I saw the familiar police cruisers pulling into the lot. I gave the police my statement, and they assured me they would go back to the spot I told them the sedan had been, to take a look, and that they would try to catch the guys who had done it. Though, with no cameras and no description of the men, I wasn't sure they'd be able to. I didn't even get the license plate number, though, at the time of my panic, the thought never came to mind until the police were asking if I got it. All they had to go off of was a dark colored sedan and two guys in masks. After I gave my statement, I went home and stayed curled up close to my boyfriend the entire night, listening to every sound the house made, in fear it would be those guys arriving any minute to finish whatever it was they started. Since the incident, I haven't heard back from the police about whether or not they have any leads, and I'm not sure if I ever will. I'm just thankful I'm still here and that I didn't stop my car or get out. I'm not sure what would have become of me if I had. I still have so many questions that have zero answers. What were they doing? Why? Was that blood on the inside of the car? Or just a ruse to get more attention? If it really was blood, did they hurt someone else? and what would have happened to me if I had stopped my car. Needless to say, I won't be going on any more late night drives to anywhere, and I hope I never cross paths with those freaks ever again. This happened to me yesterday, and before anyone says a thing, yes, I know I'm stupid. I had just gotten home from work around 9 p.m. and had barely had any time to get my shoes off when I get a phone call from some number that I don't recognize. Now, I'm searching for new jobs and thought that it might be one of the places that I was applying to calling me back. I answer the call, and it's some guy who says that he's with some kind of third party detention center, which, as he explained it, was for low risk inmates that were sent there whenever the local jails were busy or filled. That should have set off a nice big red flag for me, but for whatever reason, it just made sense in my tired brain. I'm getting ready to tell this guy that I'm not interested in making a donation or anything like that when he asks, "Am I speaking with?" and then says my full name. I confirm and he says that they're holding my boyfriend at this center, saying my boyfriend's full name and giving me a dead on description of him. I ask what was going on since my boyfriend was supposed to be at work right now, and the guy on the other end provides an explanation. He says that my boyfriend had struck a pregnant woman with his car on his way to work that day, and that he happened to have a blood alcohol content 4 times the legal limit. He said that the woman was in critical condition and that my boyfriend had broken a few ribs and his nose in the accident. I'm freaking out at this point and ask if I can speak to my boyfriend, to which the man obliges. I'm put on hold for a moment or two before my boyfriend picks up the line. This person on the other end was panicking, saying how it wasn't his fault, and he begged me to not tell his parents, again using my name in his pleas. It didn't particularly sound like my boyfriend, but I figured it was because of the broken nose that he supposedly had, and his tone really helped to sell it, because it all sounded so legitimate. The original man came back on the line before I had a chance to ask any questions, and explains that they had to sedate my boyfriend since he had begun to panic and hyperventilate, which I was starting to relate to more and more by the second. The man on the other end of the phone tells me that I should come right away and that the bail is set for $2,000, cash only. I stupidly tell him that I don't have that much and that I might have half of that. He tells me that it's fine and that I can work something out with the front office once I get there, and to just bring what I have, seeming as if he's trying to calm me down. He's giving me the address, and I can barely hold a pen because my hands are shaking so badly, and I'm very poorly trying to hold back tears. When, all of a sudden, the front door flings open, and in walks my boyfriend. Completely normal looking, no broken nose, but more than a little confused as to why I'm crying. I'm still on the phone with this man, and ask him what the he thinks he's doing, telling him how my boyfriend just walked in, just as this man promptly hangs up. I tried calling the number back a few times, but was hit with the quintessential: "The user you have reached has traveled outside of the service area. Please try your call again." I found out that the power to the bar that my boyfriend worked at had gone out, so his boss sent everyone home early. And I can honestly say that I've never been so grateful for a power outage ever in my life. My boyfriend slept on the couch to keep watch, but unfortunately, I still couldn't sleep that night. So I decided to look up the name of the organization that the man said that he worked for. Big surprise, it turned up nothing. I then looked up the address that he had given me on Google Maps, just to see that it was some random abandoned strip mall in the middle of a sketchy ass area nearly an hour and a half outside of town. What really freaked me out about this whole thing was the guy knew my number, both me and my boyfriend's full names, but didn't sound like anyone we had ever met before. I have no idea what would have been waiting for me there, but I'm counting my lucky stars right now. So, to the guy who wanted to meet me for only God knows what at that sketchy ass strip mall, let's not meet. Hey guys, we'll get back to the story shortly, but I wanted to share this truly terrifying stat with you all. Did you know that about 80% of you watching this video are yet to hit the subscribe button? Spooky, I know. But if you enjoy the content that we create here, I highly encourage you to join the community. It's cozy, comfy, and rather disturbing at times. So for those that enjoy that type of thing and haven't done it yet, please consider hitting that subscribe button now. That single click, plus your sustained viewership, really helps us creators to find a stronger grip on the platform and can mean a huge difference in the audience that we reach, which directly affects the growth and continued success of our channel over the long term. I appreciate you all for being a part of this journey, and I look forward to bringing you even more high quality and highly unsettling content as we go. For now, though, let's get back to the program. This happened in the fall of 1993, when I was 20 years old. In the interest of context, this was before I started college, and I was working in the material prep department of a plastics factory during the night shift. I was the only woman in the department, and my male coworkers were initially skeptical that I could even handle the job, but I proved myself and earned their respect. It was hard work, but on the plus side, it also put me in the best shape of my life. It was also about the same time that I dumped my abusive boyfriend. He was verbally, emotionally, and physically abusive, as well as being an alcoholic. This fact, more than anything, is probably why I got myself into this situation in the first place. I had just gotten off of work. It was nearly 1:30 a.m., and my car was running on fumes, so I stopped at a local gas station to fill up. While I was pumping gas, a woman about my age approached me, looking both nervous and scared. She said that she had been at her boyfriend's house and they had gotten into a fist fight. She'd walked to the gas station to use the payphone and call a friend to pick her up. On her way to the station, a car pulled up as she was walking, and the guys inside started catcalling and harassing her. With a slight movement of her head, she indicated a car that was parked off to the side by the gas station dumpsters. I saw a large, light green car, maybe a Cadillac or a Lincoln, with at least two, maybe three shadowy figures inside. She said that they had threatened her, and she was too scared to call her friend and wait. The woman was neat, well dressed, and didn't seem high or drunk or anything like that. She just seemed really nervous and freaked out. So I didn't even hesitate. I finished pumping my gas and told her to hop in the car, that I'd take her home. At that time, on a weeknight, there was little traffic, so I booked it right out of the gas station and asked her where she lived. She kept twisting around in the seat to see if the car was behind us, and when I asked her to put her seatbelt on, she ignored me and continued looking for the car. I had assumed that she was just terrified. A few blocks down the road, however, I noticed that she was looking around the car, and she started asking me about money. Where's your purse? Where's your bag? I need money. You need to give me some money. My stomach sank. I had this woman in my car, and now she's going to rob me? But when I thought about it, robbery just didn't make much sense. I was driving a 1985 Chevette, affectionately nicknamed Stickbox, and was wearing my work clothes, a ratty t-shirt and jeans with combat boots. I did not look like a person with a lot of cash, primarily because I wasn't a person with a lot of cash. She twisted around in the seat again and started yelling, "There they are! There they are!" She didn't sound scared anymore, though. I checked the rear view, and sure enough, that light green car is right behind us. She started cackling and bouncing up and down in the seat. "My boys are gonna f you up, bitch. They're gonna f you up." She's laughing like crazy, opening the glove box, looking in the back for a bag or purse, telling me all the messed up shit these guys are planning to do to me. Now, if I had been smart, I would have just driven to the police station. Actually, if I had been very smart, I would have called the cops from the gas station and waited with her until they arrived. That would have been the intelligent thing to do, but unfortunately, none of this crossed my mind until later. In the moment, I just got really, really angry. I realized three things all at once. One, there was an intersection up ahead with cars on either side waiting to cross, and the light had just turned yellow. 2. I had a spare box cutter that I kept for work in the driver's side door compartment. 3. The crazy bitch still hadn't put on her seatbelt. At this point, I didn't think. I floored it, passed under the yellow light just as it turned red. I glanced back to see if the green car was still behind me, but the cross traffic at the intersection had started to move, and the green car hadn't caught up. The bitch started yelling. That's when I slammed on the brakes, and she hit the dash and windshield with a solid and viciously satisfying crack. When she rebounded to the passenger seat, I had the box cutter in her face and was screaming some serious batshit crazy things at her. I can't remember exactly what I said, but it was along the lines of, "Get the fuck out. Get the fuck out of my car before I cut off your face and make you eat it, bitch." The crazy screaming and box cutter combo worked. She grabbed blindly at the handle and popped the door open, and I began shoving and punching her until the bitch tumbled out the door to the curb. I stomped on the gas, got to the next turn, and squealed around it with the passenger door still open. I made a few more turns because I was afraid that the green car might catch up to me. After a little while, I stopped to close the passenger door. Then I cut across town to get on the highway to head home. I was on the highway for nearly 5 minutes before the shakes started. I pulled off to the shoulder to calm down and try to get my shit together before continuing the drive home. I told my older sister, who I was living with temporarily after the breakup with my ex, everything that had happened. She wrapped me in a tight bear hug while simultaneously yelling about how stupid I was for not going to the police. I can tell you now, I've never been so glad to be yelled at in my life. At the time of this story, I was 11 years old and living in a nice suburban area with my family. We had recently moved into this house that my parents had built, and it was our first, quote, home versus being a rented house in a sketchy area. And this was a very nice neighborhood by comparison. The whole family made friends quickly with lots of our neighbors, but especially the ones 3 doors down. They had a daughter my age, I'm a guy by the way, and a daughter 5 years younger, which happened to be the same age as my younger sister. Our parents got along well, and we began hanging out quite a bit for barbecues at their house or parties at our house. Friendships were formed quickly and seemed to be very strong. After a year or so, I started realizing things weren't quite what they seemed. I remember seeing police cars at their house a few times in the evenings, and when I'd ask my parents what was going on, it was always nothing. Just checking in on them type answers. I was no genius, but at 11, I knew that that didn't add up. Why would the cops check up on them and not check up on us? One day, I'm at the neighbor's house playing and hanging out when the daughter goes across the street to get another mutual friend of ours, which left me and the father alone in this house. This was not really a big deal as it had happened before, but then he approached me and things seemed just a little off. I still don't know what made me feel this way, but I was uncomfortable and started thinking about leaving. About 5 minutes later, he tells me that he has something cool to show me. I don't remember what it was, but I think that it was something about baseball cards, which I was very fond of as a child. I excitedly started to follow him when he pulled the attic ladder down and asked me to follow him, which I started to do without hesitation at first. Then something happened, and I still can't quite process what it was. He was ahead of me on the ladder, and when he looked back to help me into the attic, there was something that raised alarm bells in my mind. Something about his eyes, his face, his grin. It just wasn't right. It looked evil. I can still see it clear as day and can't recognize exactly what it was that set those alarms off. But whatever it was plenty because I jumped off the ladder and ran out the door in one fell swoop. I sprinted all the way back home and was choking back tears when I burst through my front door. Mom was there when I came through, and she could see that I was obviously out of sorts and tried to start calming me down. As I came back to my senses, I explained what had happened. My mom was concerned with how scared I was, but mostly brushed it aside, telling me that I was just being silly and that whatever had happened, Probably wasn't as major as I made it feel. I should be not, though. The same exact night, I was woken up at around 3 a.m. It was my mom sitting on my bed, and as I awoke, she pressed me to her chest and held me like a baby. I remember how she smelled and how tightly she held me, and I remember her tears hitting my cheek. Eventually, I saw out the window to the neighbor's house, which was surrounded by police and fire trucks. The neighbor dad had killed himself and his daughter in the attic after a long standoff with the police. There isn't a single doubt in my mind, nor my mother's, that that would have been me had I made it all the way into the attic. Even years later, I still get chills thinking about this. So, neighbor man, even in the afterlife, let's not meet again. Back when I lived in the rural Midwest, nearly a decade ago now, I lived in a house right off of the highway. My house was right between one town and another, almost nearly on the county line. Our house had a big circular driveway. If you drove in the driveway, you would be going straight towards our barn. If you curved right, you could pull into our garage. If you went past the garage, you would circle around in front of the house and pull out back where you started. Our house had two large double doors in the front, which we rarely used. We would mainly use the door that was inside the garage. One night, very late, our doorbell rang. My husband, my 3-year-old daughter, and I were all asleep. It woke me up, and I thought that maybe I was dreaming. But then it rang again. That's when I woke my husband up. He thought that I was just hearing things, until it rang again. It was very dark outside, nearly pitch black, but we have a dusk to dawn light, so most of the driveway is pretty lit up. Unfortunately, you can't really see out the front doors unless you open the door to look out. You can open just one at a time, or you can open both of them by using two latch-like things that are in the top and the bottom of one of the doors. My husband gets up from bed. I closely follow behind him. He decides that he's going to open the door. I want to call the cops, but because we live on the county line, we know it's going to be a while before anyone can get here. He opens the door to a girl, maybe in her early 20s. She looks normal, except for the fact that she's standing at my door in the middle of the night. I look past her, and her car is pulled into my driveway just off of the road, but not quite up to the house, not around the circle either. She says that she needs to use the phone. She says her car battery died or something. She's not sure, but she can't get it to start. I told my husband, no fucking way. This is how horror movies start. And we offer to call the cops, which would be the county sheriff. She asks over and over to come in and make the call, but I'm not letting her in. We tell her we will call, and that's when she kind of stomps off. We watch her walk back to the car, maybe 50 feet away. I can see the car. I can see her. I call the cops. They say they'll be out as soon as they can. Give me an estimate of about 15 minutes. Although they don't sound very concerned, and at this point, I'm not really that concerned either. I mean, it's just a girl after all. She probably does have a dead battery. But that's when she heads to the trunk, pops it open. No lights come on. She rummages around in the trunk. Then, the driver's side door opens. Out steps a guy. Then back passenger door opens. Out steps one more guy. Now they're all rummaging around in the trunk. No lights on. All I can see is their silhouette. I can't hear a thing. Can't hear them talking. Can't quite tell what they're doing. But all in unison, they get back in the car. At this point, maybe 5 minutes have gone by, and I'm silently praying that the sheriff puts his foot on the gas and gets here quickly. But I know it's going to be another 10 minutes or so. They just sit there, in the car, lights off, not moving. I can't see them when they're in the car, but obviously I know they're in there. I know they didn't get out of the car and walk past the house because they would have had to walk right under the dusk to dawn light. I would have seen them. I think I see the driver light up a smoke, but that part I'm not quite sure about. But then I see something else. Someone walking towards the car from the right of our property, coming from the direction of our barn. It's another man, and I have no idea who this is. We don't have a neighbor for at least another mile around us. And this man is coming from the back of our property, which ends in a creek. He walks under the dusk to dawn light, straight to the car. Doesn't even look at the house. Just strolls to the car and gets in. The car starts up without an issue, and they slowly back out of my driveway and make a turn to head north. The cops arrive about 10 minutes later, and at this point, I'm totally freaking out. They search around the property, but can't find a thing. Ask us if we got a license plate number, but they were parked too far away. Cops tell us to call back if the party happens to return. Sure, buddy. Thanks. My husband heads to our garage, grabs his shotgun from the locker, and we try to get back to sleep. Those people never came back. I don't know who they were, and I certainly don't know what they wanted, but I doubt it was just to make a phone call. Had it just been the three people in the car, I would have only been half as creeped out as I was. The fact that they had another person with their group just casually stroll out from behind our house to rejoin them added to my angst more than just a touch. But then effortlessly starting the car, after that being the stated reason for their presence in the first place, and simply pulling out into the night, really drove those chills into the depths of me. And that's actually what prompts me to say, creepy people in a car without a dead battery. I pray you don't come back, and I'll be happy to never meet you again. This is going to be long. Apologies in advance if it doesn't make much sense. I have panic attacks when I think about this and struggle to put it all together. This happened back in 2021. I, a 27-year-old female, had just moved from Melbourne to rural Australia to live with my boyfriend, who was on a military posting at the army base, and also to escape Melbourne's insane COVID lockdowns. The town I moved to is pretty isolated, about 4 or 5 hours to reach any large city in any direction, but it was big enough with a few different suburbs surrounding the main area. Neither of us knew the area before moving here, and that's what led us to getting a house in a pretty sketchy part of town. I will try and explain the setup of the house, as this will be important for later. The house was old, with huge glass windows everywhere, including the entirety of the front of the house. Because of this, you could see into the kitchen, living room, and one of the unused bedrooms without coming down the driveway. There was an old metal fence to the left of the house, which was about 1.5 meters tall, that went directly into the backyard, and to the right of the house was a small path, hidden by overgrown bushes and plants from the front, with a locked gate the height of the house that led to the back semi-enclosed patio and back door. The path was right next to the kitchen window, but it was a window that you couldn't see out of when the kitchen light was on, although you could see in. When coming in through the back door from the patio, you would walk through the laundry with an adjacent bathroom, into the kitchen with our bedroom off to the left, and a secondary bedroom directly next to ours. Our bed was on the wall that connected to the living room, which meant it looked right out to the backyard, as it also had huge glass windows. My boyfriend had been out in the field for a week, so I was home alone. It was summer during this period, and it was hot. The house had terrible AC, so I had been sleeping with the windows open, and had even left the back door wide open on accident when falling asleep a couple of times. I've always felt safe in Australia, and have lived mostly alone since I was 18, so I didn't have a huge issue with it. It comes to Friday, my 5th day alone, and I decided to walk into town for something to do. The walk took about an hour each way, and when I finally got home, I was looking forward to doing nothing besides getting out of the heat. I spent most of the afternoon and evening in the living room playing PlayStation and watching TV. I had heard a few noises down the side of the house on the path next to the kitchen, leading to the patio that evening. But the guy who lived next to us had a workshop of some kind, so I assumed it was just him tinkering around. Now, I'm one of those people who will lie in bed before they are ready to go to sleep. So I head to bed around 10 p.m., and I was doing my nightly scroll of Let's Not Meet. But it was actually the stories and the content of them that stopped me and prompted me to get up out of bed and go close and lock the back door. The back door had a normal lock and then a reinforced deadbolt with a key screwed into the wall. About an hour or so later, still hearing the neighbor tinkering around occasionally, I decide that I'm ready to actually go to bed now. So I get up, start turning off all the lights, including the back patio light and kitchen light. I lie back down in bed again and am finishing up my mindless scrolling when I hear some noise once more, although this time it was a bit louder. I figured it was still the neighbor guy in his workshop or maybe some kind of animal, so I decided to put down my phone and drift off to sleep. After a couple of minutes, I hear a loud bang at the back door, and I instantly felt like everything went into slow motion. Almost instinctively, I knew that someone was kicking in the back door, but I also thought, there's no way this could be happening. Then came another bang, and another. It was so loud, and I felt like the entire house was shaking. I hear glass shattering, and then the banging continuing. Now this felt like it went on for an eternity, although I know now that it was no more than a few minutes. In my panic, after the second or third bang, thinking I could scare whoever it was off by pretending a man was there, I yelled out, "Oi!" in the deepest voice I could. I slammed my bedroom door closed. I have no idea why I did any of that. I locked it and called 000 before pushing my bed up against the door. The banging is still going on when I'm connected to the police, and then it stops. There was nowhere to hide, so I was crouched down in the corner of the room near the edge of my bed. While on the phone to 000, I can hear someone start kicking the bedroom door. I'm screaming at this point. I don't remember what I was saying to the dispatcher or what they were saying to me, but I remember praying that the police would arrive before these intruders made their way inside the room. I hear sirens. The banging on the bedroom door stops, and that's when I see flashlights shining in through my bedroom window. Because I was so scared and I couldn't understand what the operator was saying to me, I had no idea if the flashlights were whoever just kicked in my back door or if it happened to be the police. I don't remember how I came to realize, but it was the police. And the next thing I remember, I'm in the kitchen surrounded by 10 police officers, crying, doing my best to explain what had happened. I was absolutely inconsolable. So much so that the police had to use my boyfriend's army photos on the fridge to get his details to call the duty officer to get him to come home. Once I calmed down a bit and my boyfriend got home, I saw the back gate to the patio had been broken. The bedroom door was cracked. The back door had been kicked clean off its hinges, with the deadbolt completely ripped out of the wall and the laundry window smashed. There were 2 sets of clear footprints on the door from where they had kicked the door in. I checked my phone. I called emergency services at 12:04 a.m. and had been on the phone with them for less than 5 minutes. All I can think that happened is that whoever these intruders were followed me back for my walk. They could easily see from the road that I was alone and were watching me on the path next to the kitchen for the entire evening. The noises that I thought were coming from the neighbor was actually them. And once I turned the lights off, they made their move. I don't think they anticipated the back door being so hard to break down, which is why they smashed the laundry window to unlock it. But they couldn't unlock it without the key. That's when they went back to kicking. That momentary delay is what saved me from whatever they were going to do. Whoever it was, they were never caught, and we ended up moving houses within the next few weeks. My boyfriend and I ended up splitting up, as he was regularly out in the field or on duty at night, and I couldn't handle being home alone at night anymore. I would panic, cry, and not sleep until the sun would come up, and it put too much strain on the relationship. It wasn't until later that I realized that I was experiencing PTSD. I now live back in my home city in an apartment building that has 24/7 security and a billion cameras. I also have 2 dogs by my side every night. So to the guys who kicked in my back door and attempted to get into my room, I have no idea what you were going to do to me, but I'm very glad that we didn't have the pleasure of meeting. I'm a 30-year-old transgender male for the sake of my demeanor when this event occurred. At the time, I was a timid 19-year-old lesbian unleashed into this world immediately after graduation. I had just lost my job at McDonald's due to a massive flood taking out a lot of businesses in my area, and I had a girlfriend that lived 30 minutes away, and I needed gas money to go see her. So I took a job offered to me by a family friend at a 24/7 gas station in the next town over. The shift that I was hired for was 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., graveyard, and I'd never worked a night shift in my life. But I thought that it would be pretty cool to have little to no pressure other than to make sure the coffee was ready at 4 a.m. for the morning regulars. I was required to train on day shifts for the first couple of weeks to get accustomed to the operations. Throughout those weeks, I learned many of the ins and outs of what takes place on night shift, and I also learned the ins and outs of the people that hung around the place for hours, and there were quite a few of those. One sweet woman in particular, Melinda, would come in every morning before and after dropping her kids off at school, around lunchtime sometimes, actually buying us lunch. And in the evenings, when her husband was home, she'd come in for a couple of hours, considering she lived a couple of streets over. She was nice, and I started to enjoy her visits, and we all got along so well in the store, so it was never any trouble when she decided to hang out for a while. It was a fun atmosphere for the most part. It's finally time for me to work night shift, and I had my manager with me for the first few nights. I was actually taking her place on night shift because she couldn't do it anymore. She was nice, and I admit that I had a pretty big crush on her, so I didn't mind spending the time with her all night. And I learned when she worked night shift, Melinda would usually come by then as well. I had been working night shift alone for a couple of weeks, and some of those night shifts drug into the days when we were short staffed. But again, I needed the money, so I didn't mind. Anyway, one night I was doing my chores, scrubbing the hot dog rollers, setting coffee filters up for the rush, and mopping the entire store. While emptying my mop bucket, I heard the chime of the door and looked at my watch to see that it was about 2 a.m. Now, the time wasn't odd, but the fact that somebody stopped in at 2 a.m., that was. There typically wasn't anyone coming into the store until 4, and I was a little upset because I had just mopped the floor. But when I went out to see who it was, just as I headed out, I caught movement in the overhead mirror, the one designed to stop shoplifters, and that gave me pause. There was a man at the counter doing something with a money order machine, and upon looking again, I see that he has a knife. He was attempting to cut the wires. For what reason, I have no clue. While he was cutting, though, I heard him muttering, "Where's Bonka? Where's Bonka?" over and over again. I knew that I could walk back to get to the phone in the office, but I didn't want this man to hear me. So I quietly pulled my phone out and texted Melinda to call the cops. I did my best to text quickly and explain the situation as best as I could describe. I'm thankful that she texted back almost immediately, saying, "The police are on their way." I was glad to hear that, although it didn't stop me from freaking out with every second that passed. Before the police could get there, the man exited the shop, outside to the gas pumps, and threw all of the trash cans upside down before trying to cut through the gas lines. That's when I took the opportunity to lock the front door in case he tried to get back in. Thank goodness I did, because the moment that he saw me at the window, he immediately made a beeline to the door, slamming his fist directly into it, cracking the window with the force. As he finishes his tirade, That's when the cops show up, and they place him in the back of the cop car while I explained everything that had just happened. Turns out, Bonka was a name that he called my manager, whose name was Bianca. He had become obsessed with her in the weeks prior, dropping in nightly and making her very uncomfortable, which explains why she was vacating the graveyard shift. She couldn't take it anymore. They knowingly threw a shy 19-year-old into this mess, and seeing me there instead of her was what turned that man's obsession into rage. I don't know whatever happened to the man. I do know that I didn't work at that gas station for much longer. While I like to think that I've grown and matured since this occurrence, I don't know if I'll ever truly be able to put this experience behind me. I don't work nights. I'll never work in a position where I'm alone for long stretches of time. And that family friend that chose to employ me, knowing the situation they were going to drop me into without a heads up, well, I don't think I've called them a friend in many moods. Safe to say that this experience changed me. I don't know for good or for bad, but definitely a change. My older sister and I recently stumbled across a memory during our weekly visits with each other. We had just moved to a suburb, our first house in a decent, yet isolated part of town. She was 12, I was 7. Mom let us take our white German Shepherd for a walk, alone. I remember the sun was setting over the desert landscape, but we weren't worried. It was nice to be able to walk unsupervised down the street. We lavished in our freedom and took our time, letting Kodak, our dog, sniff and investigate everything that he wanted. We had just let him off the lead and were watching him chase a rabbit. I guess that's why we didn't hear the car pull up, nor the huge man that was creeping up behind us. Kodak was a ways off when suddenly he turned back and glanced at us. Like a streak of white lightning, he raced back towards us. He flew. I'm not sure if his feet touched earth, but he blasted past our waiting arms and landed on the large man behind us. We turned, and we saw Kodak latched onto the man's arm. The man, now on the ground, screaming, doing his best to detach this dog from him. Kodak was a big dog, with big teeth, and he was absolutely shredding this guy's arm. The man was eventually able to get Kodak off of him, and that's when our dog took a stance between us and the man. We apologized to the creep, not realizing what danger we were in. The man offered a shaky smile and told us we were good kids as he stumbled off back to his car. I remember seeing a length of rope on the ground, which now I can only assume that he had been holding. We looked at Kodak, and he was growling profusely and continued to growl until we made it all the way home and he escorted us inside. That's when my sister looked at me and she said, "Don't tell Mom, or they'll have to put Kodak down for biting someone." I was so naive. We were so naive. We thought that we were protecting our pet, but in actuality, he had saved one or both of us from a terrible fate. Now, much later, I learned that my hometown was in a heavy area of violent criminals and otherwise predators. Many of the surrounding towns and communities had passed legislation that wouldn't allow these people to live in their towns. So in turn, they lived in ours. No wonder our house was so cheap. As adults now, it's pretty clear for us to decipher what that man's intentions were. And to say that I'm glad Kodak was there to put those plans to a halt would be an understatement of a lifetime. Kodak passed about 5 years later. We buried him in the backyard and planted a tree over him. Our mother still lives in that same house, and I visit that tree every time I'm over there to see her, making sure to tell Kodak that we still remember how good of a boy he was. I'm going to go all the way back with this story. It happened when I was about 5 and my best friend was 6. I think one of the scariest elements of this story is that it took place at our elementary school, a place where all kids should feel safe. Quick school layout. The building was L-shaped. The short end of the building was not in use at the moment, and cars could stop to the right of the L, which would be in full view of the schoolyard, or behind the short part of the building, which would have been mostly obscured. The road was pretty much in a square right around the school, but only in the aforementioned places would cars be able to pull over. We were at school one day, and I remember my friend doing something that made me angry. She grabbed my colorful pens without asking. Needless to say, I wanted revenge. Shortly after recess started that day, I saw my best friend walking towards the back of the short building, and I followed her, thinking that she was going to do something fun. When I rounded the corner, I saw a man in a car giving her candy through the open passenger door. Well, at least he was trying to. My childish mind thought, why doesn't that guy just step out and give her the candy? Now he's holding it just outside of her reach, and she's going to have to climb in the car to get it. His seat's going to get all messy. My friend had one knee on the car seat, reaching for the candy now. I suddenly realized that this was the perfect time for my revenge. I was going to stop her from getting that candy. So I yelled at her that she wasn't allowed to be this close to the road, knowing that we'd get in heaps of trouble if caught near the road instead of being on the playground, and that I was going to tell on her. This caused her to jolt back, and she ran away from the car, back towards the school ground, taunting me with the fact that a passerby thought she was so pretty that he wanted to give her candy, but not me. Apparently a teacher saw me walk towards the road and was on her way to fetch me. So she was just around the corner from us when my friend started to tease me. The teacher heard what was said and quickly ran the last few steps towards us, frantically asking, "Did anyone get in the car? Did you see any classmates getting into a car?" She was clearly panicked, and the car was long gone by now, having driven off when I yelled at my friend. My friend answered no. The nice man just wanted to give me some candy, and that my name said she'd tell on me, so we ran back. I really wanted that candy. Are we in trouble now? The teacher escorted us inside, had all the other teachers count heads, and luckily everyone was there. We talked to the police that were called, though neither me nor my friend knew what the matter was at this point, until her parents came to fetch her and gave her a stern talking to about accepting candy from strangers, saying things like, "We've talked about this, and we have plenty of candy at home." My mom was proud of me because she thought I listened to the stranger danger talks and protected my friend. I didn't take my opportunity to correct her. A few years ago, my best friend and I were talking about our old school, and this day actually came up. We both just realized that if I hadn't been so obsessed with those pens, or if she had asked before taking them, that she could have been kidnapped and suffered a pretty bad fate. She couldn't believe how stupid she was for thinking that a random guy would really offer candy to kids from his car, especially since her parents had warned her about strangers before. I just felt embarrassed for not recognizing the situation from the talks that my parents gave me, and being so focused on getting revenge on her. It took me a while longer to fully realize just what could have happened to her. I don't know if the guy was ever arrested or did anything else, and after this incident, my school started permanently posting a teacher as a lookout near the road. As far as I know, there were no more incidents at that school, and it was never really spoken of again. The official reason for the lookout teacher was to prevent students from running out onto the road and getting hit by a car. When I drove past last year, they had put a fence all around the school. I'm guessing it's because they finally realized a fence is cheaper than paying a teacher an hour a day to just stand around. To the guy who probably wanted to try to kidnap my best friend in broad daylight, I can only hope that you never got your hands on any other child trying to use those same tactics. This happened to me about 20 years ago. I was only 9 at the time, but my parents have told me their side of the story on a bunch of different occasions, and that's helped me connect the dots. My parents are both biologists. They met at work, and from there, it's history. The place where they worked at the time was a government building dedicated to biology research, used in government projects turned towards the public, meaning they were the ones studying the environment and making environmental protection laws around their studies. This being a massive, old government building, it always had a security guard present, both day and night. During the day, these security guards would mostly just stay at reception to greet people, but at night, they would go do their rounds and make sure there were no intruders on the premises because of all the science equipment and computers kept in the building. One of these guards is my let's not meet guy. Initially, he seemed like the nicest person. He was really nice to me, and frankly, all the memories I have from him before this were really pleasant. He would greet me and talk to me in the nicest way every time my parents brought me to work. He would make me paper planes, which he was surprisingly good at, and throw them around with me, and he would stay with me at reception on the days my parents had to work into the evening. Obviously, for me, that would get really boring really, really fast. So he'd keep me company and do his best to entertain me. Mostly we would talk, play with the paper planes, and watch TV. It all seemed nice enough. Nice enough for my parents to trust him with me, which was probably their biggest mistake. One night, my parents had to work even later than usual. I think it was around 10 p.m., and they were still at it. So this guy, who was on the night shift, decided to take me around the building with him to do his rounds. We began on the top floor, checking all the rooms and the exterior part of the roof. Every room was so dark that I'd always stay a little bit behind and wait for him to turn on the lights. Then we stepped down to the second floor, where my parents' office and labs were. We checked the opposite side of the building, going into labs with massive extractors, microscopes, and every kind of science equipment that you might think of. We walked down the stairs to the first floor, where most of the administration rooms were. I still remember seeing some maps on the walls and embalmed fish everywhere, serving as decorations. First floor was all clear, so it was time to check the two basement levels. I thought it would have made sense to check the labs on the right side first, as the left side had a flight of stairs at the end leading up to where my parents were. But for some reason, he decided that we'd go check that side first. We checked all the labs, but I noticed that his pace was accelerating, and he was even starting to look and sound happier, excited even. Once again, we checked all of the labs, all the corners, from one end to the other, turning the lights on ahead of us and turning them off behind us when we left. When we got to the last area, he turned all the lights on and we went inside. There were 3 separate offices on each side of the lab, and on the first one, he hurried towards the printer, opened it up, took out 2 pieces of paper, and made 2 quick paper planes. But if I recall correctly, that's when everything changed. He picked up one of the planes, went outside of the office, and threw it towards the end of the room. Then he told me the one he just threw was mine, and that we could go throw them around in there. I ran to the other side of the room to pick up my plane, excited to play with it, when suddenly the lights went off. When I turned around to check what was happening, I saw him exiting out of the lab door, turning the lights off, and locking the door behind him. I ran to the door, punched it, and kicked it while screaming for him to open, panic taking over me because of just how scared I was of being in the dark at that time. Through the glass on the door, I could see him scurrying away in the corridors, turning the lights off as he went, disappearing after turning a corner. I'm pretty sure that everything I felt and every shadow and creepy monster I saw in there while waiting was part of my imagination because of how scared I was. I balled up against a corner and could see shadows moving around me in the dark. All I could do was cry, lost, without knowing what was happening and why that guard was doing what he was doing. My parents finished work eventually, and when they did, they packed up their things and made their way to the lobby to pick me up and head home. When they got there, the security guard was at reception, but I was nowhere to be found. They panicked, of course, must have shouted 100 different cuss words at the guy, and I'm not sure how my dad didn't murder him right then and there. But when they first asked the guy where the hell I was and what he had done with me, he simply said that he had gone to do the rounds with me, and I must have gotten lost somewhere. This is a building that would take about an hour and a half to check from top to bottom, even if you're rushing. So the must have gotten lost somewhere isn't exactly helpful. My parents looked for hours before they found me. It was only when I saw a far off light at the end of the corridors leading to the lab that I was in that I got the courage to stand up, rush towards the door, and begin punching it as hard as I could. They finally found me there and made the guard unlock the door to get me out. I don't really remember sleeping that night, and if I did, it must have been out of exhaustion. But I know I made my mom stay in the bedroom with me the entire night. Of course, my parents made a complaint against the guard, and when they did, the guy started being investigated. He was quickly fired and arrested, although very little of that had to do with me. He didn't get fired for locking me away, where he probably hoped that no one would find me, but he was fired because he had been partnered up with other criminals to steal computers and equipment from the building, selling the computers along with the information held on the hard drives for profit. By then, he had stolen a lot of old computers without anyone realizing, and who knows what his plans were for me that evening. I'm not convinced that locking a crying child in the middle of the darkness, hidden away in some room, is exactly the most normal behavior if you're not trying to conceal them and then come get them later when everyone has left, perhaps as an effort to sell them off as part of your product. Luckily, he never had the chance to do that. I also really hope that he never got to do that with any other kid. This story picks up around 2008. I'm a guy and was 23 at the time that this all began. I remember it being the weekend, and an old high school friend had reconnected with me online, so we decided to go grab a beer at a bar in his hometown, which happened to be the same town that I went to college in. It was my turn to get the round, so I went up to the bar at this dim, dirty dive bar and asked for a bucket of beers. As I was waiting for my beers, a girl approached me. Let's call her Jane. Hey, do you remember me? She was acting flirtatious out the gate. I really didn't know or couldn't remember meeting her, so I said something like, I'm sorry, I talked to a lot of people at my job. Can you refresh my memory? She stated that she took a class with me and worked with me on a group project, although I still had no idea who she was, but she knew my name and the class that we had supposedly taken together. I wasn't really interested in talking to her, so I politely said, well, it was nice seeing you again, and went back to my friend at the table. I ended up leaving about an hour later to head home. I remember that I took a shower and was getting ready to go to bed. I checked my phone before climbing into my sheets to see that an unknown number had called me 2 times, plus texted and left me a voicemail during the time that I was in the shower. The text was from Jane, saying that it was great seeing me and that I looked cute or something along those lines. Once again, very flirtatious. I again wasn't going to lead a girl on, so I responded politely, saying that it was cool seeing her as well. I was a little weirded out though, because I didn't give her my phone number at the bar. I wrote this off, thinking that maybe she had it on an old list if she were in my class. When I woke up, I had over 10 texts sent to me, inviting me over to hook up. It was point blank, literally just telling me to come over. I laughed it off at first and was kind of flattered, but my thought was, man, she must have drank a lot that night. I didn't respond as I felt it would have been awkward. Then the real shit begins. I worked in an office where I could not have my cell phone out, and it's a very professional environment. On my break one afternoon, I powered my phone on to see 19 missed calls, 25 texts, and approximately 10 voicemails. I freaked out as I thought that there was an emergency, but everything on the phone was from Jane. These messages went from hellos to sexual advances, to anger, questioning why I'm not answering, to sobbing and sorries, to threats of unaliving herself if I don't respond. I was beyond freaked out, but I texted anyway to see if she was okay or if she truly needed help. She responded to me as if it was the greatest day of her life hearing from me. I then let her know that I felt her messages were inappropriate and that I didn't want to give her any feelings that I wanted to date her. I was young and wanted to experience dating, but not with her. From the beginning, this just seemed so odd to me. She began to go through cycles of anger, seduction, sadness, happiness, the whole gamut. I began getting 40 plus calls and messages a day. I decided that it would be best to just stop responding at this point. This went on for over a week, day and night calls and messages. Then one message caught my eye. She happened to mention where I worked. I never told her this. I began to get paranoid when leaving work, thinking that she was following me. I drive around for a while before heading home from work regularly, just to test out if anybody was following me through the streets. I remember sending her one last message, stating that if she contacted me again, I would call the police. At the time, I would have had to pay a fee to my cell phone provider to have a number blocked from contacting me. I wasn't doing as well financially then as I am now, so I resisted that move. But after sending the message threatening to call the authorities if I heard anything more from her, I never did hear anything more from her. But those days and weeks after this interaction absolutely stuck with me. The fear of being followed home or having her catch me when I was out all gave me chills. There were a few times that I had that someone's watching me feeling when I was at the bar or gym. And one time I think I saw her standing outside of my office building. But now, given the time that has passed, I don't know if that was just my worry-fueled imagination or what. I still don't remember her from that class we took together. Don't know how she knew all she did about me. Don't know if she was ever really a threat to me or even to herself. But I know that even after all this time has passed, it's probably still not enough for me to ever want to meet her again. Jane, for all intents and purposes, I hope that you're well and hope that you stay far away from me. So I'm a 24-year-old female living in Los Angeles, California. I left my home state when I was 18 and moved out west for school. I can easily say that it's been one of the better choices of my life. After college, I was lucky enough to find myself a job that pays relatively well for where I live. But after several years of living with multiple roommates and sharing a living space with others, I decided that I was done with that, and I prioritized living on my own ever since. I have a great one-bedroom apartment that I love, although I don't live in the glitziest or safest part of the city. This is what leads me to my story that actually just unfolded a few nights ago. I was coming home later than usual from work, probably around 11:30 p.m. As I pull into the parking lot of my complex, I head for my assigned spot, and as I pull in, I notice a guy 3 or 4 spots away from me, appearing to be loading or unloading things from his car. He looked a bit older than me, dressed like he had just gotten done camping or something. Parka-style jacket, hiking boots, 5 o'clock shadow. As I get out, I can already feel his eyes on me as I lock up my car and begin heading for the front door. But before I get too far away, he calls out, "Hey," and says, "You've got a headlight out." This is something that I knew already. but I replied that I hadn't had time to get to it and thank him for the heads up. As I turned to leave again, he says, "Well, I can probably take care of that for you, if you want." Again, I stop and say, "No thanks. I'll get to it when I do, and it's not that big of a deal." But at this point, I can feel that he's not ready for our interaction to be done. He attempts to make small talk, which, given the hour of the night, felt a little off putting on its own. And while I'm used to guys trying to flirt or hit on me, not tooting my own horn here, it's just something that women have to deal with, he wasn't really doing that. He was asking more awkward style questions. Have you lived here long? What's the community like? Is there anywhere to explore around here? But the one that stuck out most was, what time does the front door lock? This man asked vague enough questions that one could assume that he had just moved in, but he never said that. And that door question was particularly strange because, at that moment, the front security door leading into the building had a broken lock. This is something that both myself and other tenants had shared with the building manager, but nothing had been done about it yet. The door would open and shut with a loud click, so it might sound as if it were bolted shut. But one pull would tell you differently. Now, this dude was sketching me out, so I didn't want to be super forthcoming with any response really. But by the time his last question hit, I decided that it was time for me to head inside. I excused myself as smoothly as I could and headed for the door. Once I was sure that he wasn't following behind me, I held out my key as if I were having to unlock the door, and as securely as I could, I shut it behind me. Now, I live on the first floor, and my apartment windows face the parking lot. Hold on to that for the time being. Once I get to my own front door, I quietly listen to hear if anybody is messing with the door in the lobby. I don't hear a thing, so I open my door and quickly shut and lock it behind me. My next instinct, like most people, is to flick on the lights in my dark apartment. But before my hand hits the switch, I get this cold feeling, a feeling that was instant and told me, hold off on the lights for a second. Instead, I grabbed my phone. Now, the building that I'm in is equipped with a communal version of a Ring doorbell. It sits at the main entryway and serves as a way to see who is at the door before any of us residents buzz someone in, when the door is locked at least. When I open the app up, I can't help but notice that same strange man standing about 20 feet from the door, just staring up at the building. It was an odd sight, but it got me wondering what exactly he was doing, because he stood completely still and looked as if he were a statue, like he was waiting for something. Well, as a woman, you have to be more aware or more ready to connect the dots or whatever you want to call it, compared to our male counterparts. My mind jumps from his outwardly strange demeanor to a realization of what he actually is doing. This man saw me park in front of my building. He watched me walk into the building. And now, I believe that he was waiting to see if he could figure out which apartment was actually mine. I froze and kept my eyes fixed on my phone. He kept his eyes fixed on the building. And we kind of just sat in a stalemate for about 5 or so minutes. Like I said, I live on the first floor, and while my windows aren't exactly on the ground level, they are only 10 or so feet above the ground and don't have any sort of bars or deterrent on them. So I for sure wasn't about to key this guy in on where I stayed. After a little while, it seems like dude just kind of gave up. He took a few steps towards the door, peeked in through the glass entryway, but thankfully never touched the door handle. He turned and walked back towards where his car was parked. And while it was only a matter of moments between him staring in and walking off, it was easily the most unsettling part of this interaction. I never saw his car drive by the camera towards the exit of the lot, but after gaining a little courage to look out the window, the car was no longer in the spot that it was when I pulled in. While this story might not resonate with most people as being the most creepy, I wanted to share this more as a precautionary tale. I'm not sure why this guy was so interested in where I lived, but it didn't give me a good feeling. And when that sensation hit my gut, telling me to not turn on my lights, I think that was something worth listening to. So, to anyone that hears this, I hope that it at least gives you something to ponder in terms of not broadcasting to everybody, especially those that may not need to know where you choose to lay your head. Thanks for listening. In 2018, I lived with my partner and my German Shepherd in the Humboldt Park neighborhood of Chicago. I was 33 years old at the time, and our apartment was a fourth floor walk up unit. Very typical low budget Chicago rental in an up and coming neighborhood. The layout of our building is going to matter to the story. Our building had a total of 12 units, mine, and the three below me, and had a shared front entrance, and the other 8 units were through a second entrance. All 12 apartments had connected back porches and stairs that shared a walkway to a rear gate, which led down to an alley. From the front stairwell, there are windows on each landing to the back porches, so you can see the back door of my apartment when standing at the front door through that window. We had good relations with our neighbors, especially those that lived directly below us and shared our front door. This was a thing that saved all three of us, my partner, my dog, and myself. My partner was in a touring band at the time and would leave for weekends or even weeks at a time. And it was a scary thing for me because I was assaulted and stalked by an ex in my teens and 20s, and I still have the PTSD from it. I was always worried that something would tip off my ex, and he'd start stalking me again. A little less than a month before our 2-week tour my partner had scheduled, I received a creepy Facebook message from that stalker ex from yet another new account. About a week after that, my car was broken into. The glove box was emptied, things were thrown around, but the only thing that was taken was a bag of dog treats. I had about $20 worth of change in the compartment between the seats, and they left the money. I was on high alert at that point, and very scared about the time that I'd be alone during the tour. My partner was kind of irritated with me and the situation, and felt that it was too last minute to cancel, especially over what amounted to a bad feeling and a few isolated things that weren't direct threats. And truthfully, car break-ins are very common in Chicago. It's happened to me like 15 times, and the police usually do the reports over the phone, don't even come to the scene. What I found really strange was that the thief didn't take the money though. My partner left for his tour, and I set up cameras and bought door braces for my front and back doors. I became completely nocturnal, unable to sleep at night. My poor dog developed diarrhea, maybe because she was picking up on my own stress levels. It meant that I was taking her down all 4 flights of stairs for her to go blast her bowels 6 or 7 times a night. I had the distinct prickly, crawling sensation of being watched when I would take her out, but I couldn't tell what was genuine and what was my own fear and paranoia. My dog's tummy issues lasted an unusually long time, maybe 4 or 5 days. I was going in and out of the main door a lot, feeling scared. Then I noticed that some of my neighbors wouldn't pull the door all the way closed enough that the lock would engage. I mentioned this to my downstairs neighbor one day, including that I was extra careful because of the stalker. He was supportive, said he'd mention it to the other neighbors if he saw them, and I noticed that the door was locked more frequently after that. My partner came home at about 11 a.m. on a Sunday morning. At about 8:30 a.m. that morning, my first floor neighbor's place was burglarized. The neighbor was a metalhead dude who collected instruments, sold weed and psychedelics, and lived alone. I guess he went out for breakfast, and he left his door unlocked while he was gone. Someone had come in, eaten the leftovers in his fridge, took a coat and a pair of boots and left a filthy coat and a pair of boots in exchange. They took his college diploma, but left $500 in the same cabinet. They left all the expensive musical instruments and mixing equipment, left the drugs, but did take a set of keys. The keys were to the first floor apartment and a master key for front door and the back gate. My neighbors ran into each other right after the break-in, and the second floor neighbor said that Metalhead Dude should probably come tell me what was going on, due to the whole stalker thing. So Metalhead Neighbor did just that, came to find me, and let me know what had happened. My partner had just gotten home from his tour when he knocked at the front door. I jumped out of my skin, but looked through the peephole, recognized the neighbor, and the three of us stood on the stairs at my front door while he told us about the break-in. We jabber-jawed for a while, maybe 15, 20 minutes. While we were talking, we heard the front door open and close below us, but thought nothing of it. That's when we saw a man climbing up my back porch steps, headed straight for my back door, through the window. There was no other apartment he could have been going to, and he had to walk past all 11 more accessible units on his way to mine. This was not my stalker, nor did I recognize him, but his image is now burned in my mind. He was wearing flashy black and white high-top sneakers, not the ones stolen from downstairs. His black coat was oversized and hanging from his shoulders. We locked eyes through the window, and he froze halfway up the stairs to my back porch. He slowly took a cell phone from his pocket and called someone, as he even more slowly turned around halfway up the steps. He walked back down the stairs in an artificially slow motion, like he was pretending to be nonchalant, and then bolted into a sprint as soon as he hit the porch below mine. My neighbor ran downstairs and dialed 911. My partner and I ran through the apartment to the back porch and saw a sedan and a windowless van pull out from the sketchy building 2 doors down. Both cars floored it out of the alley. We didn't get the plates. But the cop said it wouldn't have mattered. There wasn't any crime committed, and nothing concrete to justify stopping them. They very condescendingly explained this to me as they took my statement later. My neighbor is the one who actually made the call and has the police report. My partner and I were just considered witnesses. For a long time, the thing that scared me the most happened to be the tool that my neighbor found when he went running downstairs. It was a 2x4 piece of wood, cut to about 2 feet in length, and about 6 inches of it had been made into a handle. It looked like a paddle, and for a long time I couldn't figure out what it was, but now I'm pretty sure it was a ram for the door jamb or locks. When I looked at my door afterward, it looked like the frame had been repaired, like it had been broken open before. It seems like they used the one master key to place their ram, get somebody at the back door to catch me if I tried to run out that way, and somebody else was going to come back around since they only had one key, and they'd break in my front door to go forward with whatever they had planned. When we caught them before they could catch me unaware, it seems like they aborted the plan. I suspect they'd been watching me, especially while I was taking out my dog, and figured that I was alone. It was pure coincidence that my partner had gotten home just 30 minutes before all of this. I feel that we all could have been horribly injured, or worse, had we been trapped inside and they had gotten the jump on us. Nothing else really came of this, except that my landlord refused to change the locks, although he did agree to let us out of our lease. I moved out of Chicago, and now I've added a younger dog that I'm training to do some bite work. My house is surrounded by cameras and floodlights and wingnut neighbors. So, whoever was on my back porch, and whatever you had planned, let's not meet.